Okay, so I need to tell you about something that's been deliberately hidden from American history textbooks for almost 200 years. You know these names, right? Roosevelt, Astor, Forbes, Delano, Perkins, Cabot. These are the families that built America. Their names are on libraries, museums, hospitals, schools. They're the blue blood aristocracy of the Northeast, the old money, the establishment. But here's what they don't tell you in history class. These families, basically all of them, made their fortunes the exact same way. By flooding China with opium, industrial-scale drug trafficking. Millions addicted, entire cities destroyed for 100% profit margins. And then they took that drug money and built Harvard, Yale, Columbia, Princeton. They funded the Industrial Revolution. They bankrolled America's railroads. They financed the institutions that still run this country today. This isn't conspiracy theory. The shipping records exist. The letters survive. The account books are sitting in archives right now. This is documented history that's been systematically omitted from how we teach American history. Let me explain how this happened and why it matters right now. So to understand how we got here, we need to go back to the 1780s. The United States just won independence from Britain. We're broke. We're trying to figure out how to build an economy, and there's this massive problem. China has tea, silk, porcelain, literally called China because that's where it comes from. Beautiful furniture, luxury goods that every wealthy American and European wants. The demand is insane, but here's the thing, China doesn't want anything we have. Think about that for a second. We're trying to trade with China, but they're basically like, we're good. We have everything we need. We don't want your stuff. The Chinese would only accept one thing, silver, hard currency. Which means American merchants are sailing to China, buying tons of Chinese goods, and just bleeding silver, massive trade deficit, money flowing out, nothing coming back in. The first American ship, the Empress of China, sails to Canton in 1784. Captain John Green and Merchant Samuel Shaw show up with a cargo of silver and ginseng. They make a decent profit, but ginseng, there's only so much demand for that. So American merchants start getting creative. They try furs from the Pacific Northwest. They basically hunt seals and sea otters to near extinction. Then they switch to sandow wood from Pacific Islands, ransacking entire islands until there are no trees left, then sea cucumbers every few years. They deplete another resource trying to find something China wants. And the whole time, there's this solution staring them in the face. The British figured it out in the late 1700s, the perfect commodity. Something that doesn't obey normal supply and demand. Something that creates its own demand. Opium. Here's how the British did it. The East India Company grows opium in India, massive plantations in Bengal. They harvest it, process it, and ship it to China where it's been illegal since 1729. But who cares about Chinese law when you're backed by British warships? The opium gets smuggled into China. Chinese people get addicted, millions of them. And once you're addicted to opium, you need more, always more. The demand becomes insatiable. And here's the beautiful part: if you're a British merchant, Chinese addicts pay with silver. The same silver that was flowing out of Britain to buy tea now flows back in to buy opium. By the 1820s, the Bengal to China opium trade is the world's most valuable commodity trade. It accounts for 15 to 20% of the British Empire's revenues. That's how they're financing their global empire. Drug money. Approximately 12 million Chinese are addicted. They call it Jesus opium after the white Christian smugglers, who sell it from devil's ships in the Pearl River Delta under cover of darkness. The illegal narcotic sucks up 11% of China's money supply. The social fabric starts tearing apart, families destroyed, productivity collapses, an entire civilization starts crumbling. Because of opium addiction, American merchants are watching this happen and thinking, we want in on that. So let me introduce you to the men who built America's aristocracy. They're called the Boston Brahmins, young men from elite New England families. They're educated at places like Boston Latin School, Phillips Academy, Milton Academy. Many went to Harvard or Yale. And in the early 1800s, they head to Canton, which is what they call Guangzhou, to make their fortunes in the China trade. The first major American player is John Jacob Astor. You know that name. Astor is America's first multimillionaire. He made his initial fortune in the fur trade, but by 1816, the furs are running out. So Astor's American Fur Company buys 10 tons of Turkish opium and smuggles it into Canton. He makes a nice profit and exits the business 3 years later. But he's opened the door. Then comes Thomas Hannison Perkins, born in 1764. He's a Boston Brahmin par excellence. He starts by trading slaves in Haiti. Yes, you read that right. Then he switches to furs. Then opium. Perkins becomes the dominant American presence in the Ottoman opium business. Turkish opium is cheaper than British Indian opium, so there's a market gap Americans can exploit. Perkins and his firm, J&Th Perkins, become specialists in Turkish opium smuggling. By the 1820s, dozens of prominent New England families are in the opium business. The names read like a roll call of American aristocracy: Astor, Cabot, Perkins, Forbes, Russell, Delano, Coolidge, Lowe, Hathaway, Webster, Bryant. These aren't just any families, these are the families that will shape American institutions for the next centuries. Now, let me tell you about the company that dominated American opium trafficking, Russell and Company. Samuel Russell is born in 1789 in Middletown, Connecticut. He's orphaned at 12, no inheritance, no college education. He starts as an apprentice clerk for a maritime trading firm, but Russell is ambitious. In 1818, Providence merchants approach him with an offer: be the resident agent for their new commission. Firm in Canton, 5-year contract split the profits. Russell sails to Canton in 1819 and establishes Samuel Russell and Company. Initially, the firm struggles. The Panic of 1819 crashes the American economy, but Russell perseveres, and he discovers that opium is where the money is. By 1824, he formally establishes Russell and Company. The firm specializes in 3 commodities: tea, silk, and opium, but opium is the cash cow. Russell and Company partners send agents to India to secure opium supplies. They set up sophisticated smuggling networks. They establish floating warehouses offshore where they offload opium before sailing into Canton with their legal cargo of tea and silk. By 1827, Russell and Company is the largest American opium dealer in China, competing directly with British giants like Jardine, Matheson and Co. The profits are staggering. Jacques M. Downs, a historian who spent his lifetime studying these records, writes that almost without exception, Americans involved in opium during the last quarter century of the old China trade went home with fortunes after only a few years in the trade. A few years. That's all it took to become fabulously wealthy by poisoning millions of Chinese people. Let me tell you about the Forbes family. Yes, as in Forbes magazine. As in Secretary of State John Forbes Carey, the Forbes brothers John Murray Forbes and Robert Bennett Forbes worked for Perkins and Company in Canton in the 1830s. Their uncle is Thomas Hannison Perkins, the opium kingpin the first mentioned earlier. Robert Bennett Forbes is more directly involved in the importing side. He's handling opium cargoes, managing smuggling operations. John Murray Forbes focuses on securing quality tea for export, but he knows exactly where the money comes from. In 1839, Robert Forbes writes to his wife about the opium he's bringing into China. He admits it has an unhappy effect on users, but he argues the sale is fair, honorable, and legitimate, like importing wine and spirits to America. Think about that rationalization for a second. He's comparing industrial-scale opium trafficking that's destroying Chinese society to importing wine. The Forbes brothers make immense fortunes. They become commanding partners in Russell and Company. And when they return to America, they invest their opium profits in American infrastructure. John Murray Forbes uses his drug money to fund America's railroad expansion. He bankrolls the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad. He finances the Michigan Central Railroad. He helps build the railroads that will connect the American continent. He also uses opium profits to fund Ralph Waldo Emerson's transcendentalist career and help bankroll the Bell Telephone Company. The Forbes family wealth continues for generations. Their mansion in Milton, Massachusetts, still stands in 2022. The Forbes House Museum held an exhibit called Opium, the Business of Addiction, explicitly connecting their historical opium trade to America's contemporary opioid crisis. Now, let me tell you the story that really should be in every American history textbook. Warren Delano Jr. is born in 1809 in New Bedford, Massachusetts. He's the grandfather of Franklin Delano Roosevelt FDR, the 32nd President of the United States. At age 24, Delano sails to China to work for Russell and Company. He arrives in Canton in 1833. He's ambitious, talented, ruthless when it comes to business. For the next decade, Delano lives in Canton, managing Russell and Company's opium operations. He becomes chief of operations for Macau, Canton, and Hong Kong. His greatest achievement, according to historical records, is expanding Russell and Company's opium trade. During business hours, Chinese criminals pay Delano cash and receive opium chits, basically drug vouchers. At night, scrambling crabs, long, sleek, heavily armed boats row out into the Pearl River Delta to Delano's floating warehouses. Under cover of darkness, they pick up their Jesus opium. The system is sophisticated. The profits are enormous. By 1843, Delano has spent a decade in the drug trade. He's prospered greatly. He's risen to become head partner of the biggest American firm dealing with China. He's wealthy enough to return home and marry Catherine Robbins Lyman, daughter of a Massachusetts Supreme Court judge. Then he loses it all in the Panic of 1857. So what does Warren Delano do? At age 50, leaving behind a pregnant wife and 8 children, he returns to China, to Hong Kong this time, and he rebuilds his fortune the same way through tea and opium. During the Civil War, Delano supplies opium to the Medical Bureau of the U.S. War Department. It's sold as a humanitarian effort to ease the pain of wounded Union soldiers. But let us be clear about what it really is. Warren Delano recouping his wealth from the drug trade, while America tears itself apart. The Delano family doesn't like talking about the opium connection. FDR biographer Jeffrey C. Ward notes, in a family fond of retelling and embellishing even the mildest sort of ancestral adventures, no stories seem to have been handed down concerning Warren Delano's genuinely adventurous career in the opium business. In the 1930s, when FDR is president, the columnist Westbrook Pegler accuses him of living off a fortune gained in traffic as degrading as prostitution, wrested from the degradation and wretchedness of the Chinese people by an old buccaneer. The White House maintains discreet silence. Even Eleanor Roosevelt is troubled by the connection. In 1953, she visits Hong Kong and asks a veteran British merchant about the opium era. Afterward, she reluctantly concludes, I suppose it is true that the Delanos and the Forbeses, like everybody else, had to include a limited amount of opium in their cargoes to do any trading at all. A limited amount. That's the euphemism. The reality. Warren Delano was the American opium king of China, and his drug money funded the lifestyle that produced Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So, here's where it all comes together. His opium fortunes didn't just make families wealthy. They built the institutions that educated and shaped American elites for the next centuries. Let's start with Harvard. The Cabot family, one of the biggest opium trafficking families, endows Harvard with drug money. According to historian James Bradley, the Cabot family of Boston endowed Harvard with opium money. The Perkins family also contributes heavily to Harvard. Thomas Hannison Perkins, the opium kingpin, donates his Boston mansion to the New England Institute for the Blind in 1833. Today it has the Perkins School for the Blind. His name is on it. His opium money built it. Yale University. Yale's infamous Skull and Bones Society, the secret society that produces presidents and CIA directors, was funded by the Russell family. Samuel Russell, the founder of Russell and Company, America's largest opium trafficking firm. Samuel Russell's cousin, William Huntington Russell, co-founded Skull and Bones in 1832. The society's wealth came directly from opium profits. Columbia University. Columbia's Lowe Memorial Library, one of the most iconic buildings on campus, is named after Abiel Abbott Lowe. Who was he? A New York boy who made it big in the Pearl River Delta. Translation: Abiel Lowe made his fortune smuggling opium in Canton. Lowe worked as a partner at Russell and Company from 1833 to 1841, 8 years in the opium trade. Then he returned to America and founded his own trading house, A.A. Lowe and Brothers, which became a leading firm in the China trade. His son, Seth Lowe, donated money to Columbia and served as the university's president. The Lowe Memorial Library stands at the center of Columbia's campus as a monument to opium money. Princeton University. Princeton's first large benefactor was John Cleve Green. He made his fortune selling opium in the Pearl River Delta alongside Warren Delano. Green's opium profits funded Princeton's massive expansion in the 19th century. He was the university's most generous philanthropist up to the end of the 1800s. Brown University. Brown is named after the Brown family of Providence, prominent slave traders and opium dealers. And it goes on and on. The Massachusetts Historical Society holds extensive records of these families. The letters exist. The shipping manifest exist. The account books exist. These aren't allegations. This is documented history sitting in archives that anyone can access. But the opium money didn't just build universities, it financed the American Industrial Revolution. After making their fortunes in Canton, these merchants returned to America and invested in railroads. John Murray Forbes used opium money to bankroll railroad expansion across the Midwest. Warren Delano, along with his brother Franklin and Asa Packer, founded Delano, Pennsylvania, and invested in the Lehigh Valley Railroad. Banking. Stephen Girard, who came to America from France as a cabin boy, became an immensely wealthy enslaver, banker, and shipping magnate through the opium trade, iron and steel. The Lowe family invested in the Lowmore Iron Company, helping build American manufacturing capacity. Telecommunications. Forbes family opium money helped bankroll Alexander Graham Bell and the early telephone industry. Real estate. Delano's Hudson River Estate. Algonic, Russell's mansion in Middleton, Astor's Manhattan real estate empire, all built on drug money. Cultural institutions, libraries, museums, hospitals, symphony halls. The Boston Athenaeum was funded by Thomas Perkins' opium profits. Here's what historian James Bradley says. Warren Delano, the grandfather of America's 32nd president Franklin D. Roosevelt, was the American opium king of China. Much of the east coast of America, Columbia, Harvard, Yale, Princeton were born from opium money. The foundation of America's elite institutions, the money that financed industrialization, the capital that built American infrastructure. It came from poisoning China. So, let's talk about what this actually meant for China. By the 1830s, opium imports to China have escalated from a few thousand chests annually in the late 1700s to over 20,000 chests per year. Each chest contains about 140 pounds of opium. That's nearly 3 million pounds of opium flooding into China every year. By mid-century, estimates suggest 10 to 12 million Chinese are addicted to opium. In a population of maybe 400 million, that's 1 in 40 people. Entire cities have opium dens on every street. The social decay is catastrophic. Families fall apart. Men sell everything they own to feed their addiction. Women and children are abandoned. Productivity collapses. The economy hemorrhages silver. The Qing dynasty government watches helplessly as their civilization crumbles. They've banned opium since 1729. But the ban is meaningless when British and American ships are protected by gunboats. In 1839, the Chinese government finally takes decisive action. Lin Zexu, an imperial commissioner, confiscates and destroys 20,000 chests of British opium in Canton. Britain's response: they declare war. The First Opium War lasts from 1839 to 1842. Britain, one of the most powerful military forces on earth, wages war on China for the right to keep selling drugs. British warships bombard Chinese coastal cities. British troops occupy territory. China loses. The Treaty of Nanking forces China to pay 21 million silver dollars in reparations, cede Hong Kong to Britain, open 5 ports to British trade, limit tariffs on British goods, and most importantly, continue allowing opium imports. The Second Opium War happens from 1856 to 1860. Britain and France team up this time. They burn the old Summer Palace in Beijing, one of the most beautiful architectural complexes in the world, filled with centuries of Chinese art and culture. Gone, destroyed. More territory seized, more reparations paid, more opium flowing in. American merchants like the Delanos, the Forbeses, and the Russells profit from all of it. They're not leading the military campaigns, but they're absolutely exploiting the situation. When British force opens Chinese ports, American opium dealers Russian. This is what funded Harvard. This is what built Yale. This is what paid for Columbia's libraries and Princeton's expansion. The suffering of millions of Chinese people converted into American institutional wealth. So, here's what really gets me about. This story, this history has been systematically hidden, not by accident, deliberately. When these merchants returned to America, they were very careful to hide the real nature of their businesses. Jacques Downs, the historian who researched Russell and Company for his entire career, notes that the traders were generally very careful to hide the real nature of their businesses, even warning their families back home not to make anything public of their letters. In some cases, descendants selectively destroyed papers that might implicate their ancestors directly in the opium trade. The archives are massive. New Englanders and Philadelphians never discard anything, but they also carefully curated. The smoking guns are often missing. When his families endowed universities and cultural institutions, the story became about their philanthropy, their vision, their service to America. Nobody asked where the money came from. In American history textbooks, the opium trade is presented as a British problem. The Opium Wars are taught as examples of British imperialism, which they were, but American complicity is erased. The fact that prominent American families were trafficking opium at an industrial scale. Not mentioned, the fact that this drug money built our most prestigious institutions. Omitted. I went through my own high school and college education without ever learning that FDR's grandfather was an opium trafficker, that Harvard and Yale were built with drug money, that the Forbes family fortune came from poisoning Chinese people. This history has been sanitized, whitewashed, erased, until recently, in the past few years. Some institutions have started acknowledging this history, barely. In 2017, the Harvard Crimson published an article called Opulence and Opium, the Legacy of Harvard's Drug Syndicate. It laid out the connections between Harvard and opium trafficking families. In 2022, the Forbes House Museum held an exhibit explicitly titled Opium, the Business of Addiction, connecting the Forbes family's 19th century opium smuggling to America's contemporary opioid epidemic. Columbia University has hosted seminars examining Abiel Lo's opium fortune and its connection to the university's founding, but these are academic exercises, papers that maybe a few hundred people read, museum exhibits that run for a few months. Nothing that penetrates mainstream American consciousness. There's been no institutional reckoning. No plaques on these buildings explaining where the money came from, no required courses on the opium trade for students at these universities. Low Memorial Library still stands at the center of Columbia's campus, with no mention that it's named after an opium trafficker. Yale's Skull and Bones Society continues operating as an elite secret society with no acknowledgement that it was founded with opium money. The Delano name remains prestigious, associated with FDR's legacy, with no widespread understanding that the family fortune came from drug trafficking. So why am I telling you this story? Why does 19th century opium trafficking matter in 2025? First, it reveals the true foundation of American elite institutions. When we talk about Harvard, Yale, Columbia, Princeton, we're talking about institutions built on suffering. The wealth that created these places came from addiction, death, and the destruction of Chinese society. That doesn't mean these institutions aren't valuable now, but it means we should understand their origins honestly. Second, it exposes the hypocrisy of America's war on drugs for 100 years. America has built wealth and institutions from drug trafficking, but when poor communities, especially Black and Latino communities, get involved in drug trade, we criminalize them. Mass incarceration, harsh sentences, destroyed lives. The Delanos and Russells got libraries named after them. Modern drug dealers get life sentences. Third, it helps explain China's relationship with the West. When Chinese officials talk about the century of humiliation, this is what they mean. Western powers, including America, forced opium on China at gunpoint, destroyed their economy, seized their territory, and got rich from their suffering. That historical trauma shapes Chinese policy today. The suspicion of Western motives, the determination to never be vulnerable again, the sensitivity about sovereignty and foreign interference. We can't understand modern US-China relations without understanding the opium trade. Fourth, and maybe most importantly, this history has never really ended. The Sackler family made billions from OxyContin, creating America's opioid epidemic. Arthur Sackler, the patriarch, arranged the Sackler gift to support Columbia University. He dreamed of building the Sackler Museum on campus. It's the same pattern: drug money, institutional prestige, philanthropy covering up the source of wealth. The Forbes House Museum's 2022 exhibit made this connection explicit. This exhibition stands not to frame these actions as inherently evil, but rather to show the depth in which money from the opium trade in Canton has been embedded into the framework of America. Here's what's remarkable about this story. The evidence is overwhelming. The Library of Congress holds the Russell and Company records correspondence, financial and legal records, accounts, shipping orders, 3,900 items, available to researchers. The Massachusetts Historical Society has extensive collections from the Perkins, Forbes, and Delano families, letters, shipping manifest, account books, diaries. The Peabody Essex Museum in Salem houses artifacts and records from the China trade. Harvard Business School's Baker Library Historical Collections has a chronicle of the China trade, including Augustine Hurd and Company records from 1840 to 1877. The FDR Presidential Library has Delano family papers spanning 1568 to 1919, Warren Delano's letters, business records, family correspondence. This isn't hidden in some conspiracy bunker, it's sitting in public archives, anyone can access it. Historians have written detailed studies. John R. Haddad's America's First Adventure in China. Joachim Downs' The Golden Ghetto. James Bradley's The Imperial Cruise and the China Mirage. The scholarship exists. The primary sources exist. The evidence is overwhelming. What doesn't exist is public awareness. This history isn't taught in schools. It's not part of our national narrative about American greatness. Let me summarize the key players one more time, because these names should be as infamous as they are famous. Samuel Russell founded Russell and Company, the largest American opium trafficking firm in China. His cousin William Huntington Russell co-founded Yale's Skull and Bone Society with drug money. Thomas Hannison Perkins, Boston Brahmin who dominated the Ottoman opium trade. Started as a slave trader in Haiti, his opium profits funded Harvard at the Perkins School for the Blind. Warren Delano Jr., FDR's grandfather, chief of operations for Russell and Company, the American opium king of China, rebuilt his fortune twice through drug trafficking. John Murray Forbes and Robert Bennett Forbes, brothers who made fortunes in the opium trade through Russell and Company, used drug money to fund American railroads, telecommunications, and Ralph Waldo Emerson's career. Their descendant, John Forbes Carey, former Secretary of State, Abiel Abbott Lowe, Russell and Company partner who made his fortune in Canton. His family funded Columbia's Lowe Memorial Library and invested in American infrastructure. John Cleve Green, Princeton's first major benefactor, made his fortune selling opium alongside Warren Delano in Canton. John Jacob Astor, America's first multimillionaire, entered the opium smuggling trade in 1816, made a fortune and exited, establishing the Astor dynasty. These are the names on our buildings, our libraries, our endowments, our institutions, drug traffickers, every one of them.